buddy. It is cold out there. I just took out the trash, and usually I just, make a run for it, and I don't put on my coat, but today, not possible. You got about 10 paces before your snot freezes up. You know what I'm saying? You breathe, and then snow falls. It's crazy. But that's Iowa. We like to complain, which has always kind of entertained me, because there's a lot of people that live north of us. We always talk about, Iowa winters are so terrible, but I think about all these people in Minnesota, Canada, God forbid, Alaska. We don't have it so bad. This is the tropics down here. -4, -12. It's child's play. That being said, I'm wearing long undies, and I sprung for the good kind, the merino wool. Those sheep that make the wool that doesn't itch your bottom. That's what we got on today. Got the goose down, and the long undies. You gotta use nature's gifts to stay warm in Iowa. So, Happy New Year. This is the Heartache Connoisseur 2018 version, back in the saddle, down here in my basement in the woods of Iowa. And today, I'm going to tell my story. I think I'm going to do this in several parts, and I'm just going to kind of, you may notice here too, I suddenly feel self-conscious. I've got this paint on my hands. I've started painting, and I'm kind of working on this technique of integrating painting into furniture. So, taking something that's, maybe colorful and painted, and working it into a tabletop or something like that. So I've been messing around with that in the shop over the break, and I've been having a good time. And so anyway, my story. I was talking with a friend just the other day, and Shelly and I were sitting down and having coffee with her, and she was talking about the importance of telling your story. And it's good for the teller, and it's good for the listener. It's good for you to organize your story in your mind. And the reason is because you are always telling yourself a story. And it gets pretty disorganized and confusing if you don't stop and take a look at the big picture once in a while. There are some general themes, there's the day-to-day details. Today I went to the store and bought shrimp, and it was fishy and whatever, and I threw it out. That's not what I mean. I'm talking about these big story arcs, the big plot. I just went and saw Star Wars Part God Only Knows yesterday, again, for the second time. First round I took my stepkids and my mother-in-law, and this round I took my three biological children. This time I stayed awake for approximately 75%, which was an improvement from the time before. Not that it's bad, it's just that I'm in my 40s now, so anytime you put me in a chair and turn out the lights, I snooze. So it doesn't matter how much action is on the screen. But there's these story arcs, man. It's like the same plot line repeating over and over again. You got the bad guys dressed in black that are good with the lightsaber. You got the good guys dressed in various earth tones that are good with the lightsaber. You got Luke, but Luke's getting old now, so you got this young lady now, and she's got the Force, and Darth is long gone, so now we get Kylo Ren. But you know what? It's the same plot line, roughly. And many of our lives follow these story arcs, and we have very similar plot lines. And it's comforting, We like to think of ourselves as very unique and very individual, and in many ways we are. We do have unique contributions to make to this world. But by the same token, we have much in common with one another. And instead of diminishing our individuality, I think that has the power to bring us together collectively in some ways that are very healthy and help us grow. So I'm going to start by kind of, giving you my example of how one might tell your story. And so here goes. I'm from Northwest Missouri. If you go as far northwest in the state of Missouri as you can possibly go, there's a little county up there in the corner called Atchison County, and you wouldn't have probably heard of it unless you wanted to buy fireworks, because we're right on the border of Nebraska and Iowa, and we've got more liberal fireworks laws evidently than they do, and so if you want to be a renegade, you come down and buy some bottle rockets that go way up high in the air if you're from Nebraska or Iowa, and we Missourians will sell them to you. And we know full well what you're going to do with them, but we don't care. We just want your money. So you tootle on back to Iowa or Nebraska or wherever you're from, and you hope you don't get pulled over by the highway patrol on the way back and get your bottle rockets confiscated. But it's a big part of our local economy up there, as is farming. I grew up on a farm. More or less. My father was a family doctor. I mean, a country doctor would be more the apt descriptor there. He was kind of the last of a dying breed, and was one of these guys that just did it all. He would in fact, I recorded a few podcasts with him, or one long interview that I chopped up into 3 parts a while back, and that's available also. But he went around and basically did whatever you needed, and he knew how to do more things than any generalist I've ever met in my life, and it's just not done anymore, but for liability reasons and training reasons and that sort of thing. But he was a great physician, and he really cared about people, and I admire him greatly. But anyway, so I was raised by a country doctor, and my mom was a bit younger than my dad. It was a second marriage for both of them, so I have some half siblings from my father's first marriage, 4 to be exact, and then I have 2 sisters that are adopted, and I fall in line as the youngest, technically, of 7, although my older siblings were old enough that they were really pretty much out of the house for the most part as I was being raised. So we also raised corn and soybeans on the family farm, and still do to this day. And one of my half brothers stays there in Rockport a good portion of the year and does that with his sons, and we continue the carpenter farming tradition. And I decided that farming was maybe not my first choice for a career, although it's a great life, I think. And but I decided to head off and get my education in medicine. And I used to have dreams of even going back there and practicing in that town. But when I got to my training, I decided that maybe family medicine wasn't for me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So my story, I went to a small school. My hometown had maybe, I want to say 12 to 1,500 people in it. And that's being generous, I think. But we had my graduating class, I think maybe had, I want to say, somebody out there knows the exact number, but it's probably around 40, somewhere between 35 and 40 people. And I think class sizes are still around that, or maybe even a little smaller nowadays. And so I got the opportunity to try a lot of different things in terms of different sports, and pretty much everybody makes the team. My stepson goes to a big school down the road here and plays basketball, and it's tooth and nail to make the varsity team, and all the varsity kids are like, basically small college players already. It's like, it wasn't like that. I mean, we had some really good athletes and everything, but it was nice in that regard. It was perhaps a disadvantage because there weren't as many different maybe people that had common interests if you were a little bit out of the mainstream and that sort of thing. But we made do, and we made friends with the kids that we had to make friends with, and it was a good upbringing. It was safe. We spent a lot of time riding around in our cars up and down the main drag and honking at each other and listening to music. Back then, I remember cranking like the Red Hot Chili Peppers and Skynyrd. Pretty dichotomous there, but I remember what else. The Green Day album was fresh, the very first one back then, and man, like early Flaming Lips, and these are some of the bands that I absolutely adored. I'm leaving out my hair metal phase, but I definitely had a phase of hair metal as well. I remember discovering Guns N' Roses on the bus ride home while I was in junior high. Some older kid had it on his Walkman. You remember those? He's like, "Here, listen to this." I'm like, "Good Lord, I've never heard anybody sing like that. Oh my God, what is he talking about? The jungle. Welcome to the jungle. My life feels like a jungle. I can relate to this music." So, off and running I was with that. But they call him, what do they call him? Paxel Rose. I don't want to make fun of the man. I'm sure he's got a lot of good qualities. But anyway, so I grew up in this small town, and I had a girlfriend and dated the same gal for like 4 years in high school. Lovely lady, and she's I believe raising a family, doing well, and all that. And I was also a musician, really interested in music, and played in little garage bands. I get started playing guitar in I was probably in junior high or so when I really realized that you could plug in a guitar and it could be really loud, and you could get your friends and they could be really loud, and you could play 3 chords that sounded somewhat like a song, maybe a Ramones song or a punk song of some kind. And it was a thrill, and I just absolutely loved it. And I started to sort of get into songwriting there at a pretty young age too, and really enjoyed that. But me and a couple other guys that were kind of music oriented too, we had kind of various combinations of us played in these garage bands. And I remember one poignant moment, and there was this other guy, James, and he was also a musician, and we were buddies, and we were in this garagey band together. And I remember, you know what, they kicked me out. I hope he listens to this, because he'll get a chuckle. This is a lot of water under the bridge here, but it always stuck with me, and it taught me a lesson or two at the time. But I was laying in bed this morning trying to remember exactly what went down, and maybe old Jamie S. could leave a comment in the comment section and maybe refresh me about the ways I was being a douche when I was like 16 years old or whatever. But anyway, these guys, they wanted to play more original songs, I guess. They were James was getting into songwriting too, and I was like, you know what, we got to learn covers, A, because girls like them, and B, because then we can get a job playing in a bar, which, we've, of course, had no business doing at like age 16, but I was a little bit entrepreneurial in that way, and I was thinking, man, we're good. We need to get in front of a crowd and play songs that everybody knows. But I think, James had other ideas, and he was artistically minded and wanted to write songs, and was doing a really good job at that at a very young age. And so they asked me to disengage from that relationship. And why am I telling that story? I think I'm telling that story because, and I'm sure James has his own version of that story, I'm telling that story because it was a rejection that I experienced. It was a moment in time where I was blindsided in a way. I was taken by surprise, and the way that I thought reality was not in fact the way that it was. And there was some accountability on my part. I had to kind of take a look at my own behavior. Even at that age, I was like, well, Marty, you're kind of you're being a little bit arrogant about wanting to be in control and tell these other guys how it's going to be, and maybe they didn't like that so much. And so it was. It's a moment when that sort of thing happens. You can either blame or take some responsibility? Maybe a little bit of both, and sort of work it out. But again, I'm telling that story because back to these common story arcs that we all have. I mean, is there anybody listening to this that has never experienced rejection at all in any form? I doubt it. And if you haven't, that means you're not engaging with the world at all, because you will be rejected. You'll be fired. You'll have a relationship breakup. Somebody will break up with you. There'll be a friendship that goes sour, or a family relationship, or something like that. And rejection is just a common theme in the big story arcs of life, and we'll come back to that. But it was just a little tidbit that I recalled. But so anyway, I graduated from high school there in Rockport, Missouri, is the name of my hometown, and a lot of folks from back home have been very supportive too as I've begun this venture of delivering this podcast. And so I'm really thankful to them. They've been very encouraging, and it's a real treat for me to hear back from them. And it's very encouraging. So thank you to all of you from back home, and keep listening. I appreciate that. So, but anyway, I mentioned earlier, I had this girlfriend, and we dated for like 4 years total or something, throughout my high school, career, and a little bit into college. But she was headed down to the University of Kansas. Her parents had both gone there, and she was kind of a legacy there and wanted to go do that. And I didn't know any better, and so I packed my bag and went down there too. So it's sort of one of those kind of low odds deals where at that age, things panning out in the long haul. Sometimes that works out for people, but whatever. We got down there and promptly kind of, started to experience this college life and this kind of new freedom, and we ended up breaking up in pretty short order, and I met another woman not long after. Actually, I met her the very first day I set foot on the campus down there in Lawrence, Kansas, home of the Jayhawks. And we ended up getting married later, married to her for almost 20 years and have 3 children with her. But twists of fate. It's just things. That's how it goes. I remember how terrified I was at the prospect of going off to college with this girlfriend and feeling like I was losing control of that relationship, and that it was going to take some kind of a miracle for it to survive. And to some degree, probably my fear led to the downfall of that relationship. I think it's a tendency when people are afraid they're going to lose something to kind of choke the life out of it and squeeze it too tight. And, God bless her. She wanted to kind of go explore and be a normal 18-year-old. And, that was exactly what she ought to be doing. And it was what I ought to be doing. It's what I should have been doing too. And, so, that's sort of the end of that chapter, and we wish her well, of course. But then I met Janelle, and met her pretty early on in my college career there, and later we got married. But another thing that struck me, having gone from a really small town to a larger college setting, was just like, I remember walking into my freshman chemistry class, and I'm not kidding, there were more people in the class in that auditorium than in the entire town that I had grown up in. There's like 2,000 kids in this chemistry auditorium, and the professor certainly couldn't see me. I have no idea what he looked like to this very day. All I really remember is him setting balloons full of hydrogen on fire and praying to God that I got an A. But it was eye-opening, and it was a good experience. I'm a believer in getting away at some point and experiencing some other culture that's different than your own. I mean, it's not like I went to, you know, overseas or anything, but it is a big shift to get into a town where, you know, there's the other thing too that I recall that was great was that all of a sudden I had tons of friends that were interested in the same kinds of things that I was. You know, I was a kind of a music nerd and like I like to learn, and I liked school, and I took school pretty seriously. And suddenly I lived in this, we called it it was called a scholarship hall, and it was like 50 guys that were basically eggheads that got good grades or got a certain score on some standardized test that's meaningless. But they stuck us all into these 50-person living situations, and it was just it was a collection of awkwardness like you've never seen before. But we were all in it together in some weird ways. It was like we had to break up the chores. It was kind of like a fraternity, except it wasn't technically a fraternity. And we were much less oriented towards, you know, what fraternities seem to be oriented towards. But that's not totally fair. I don't really know because I wasn't in one. But anyway, so we were kind of the nerdy kids, and it was a great experience. Though we played spades and hearts until our eyes fell out, and you know, thought we were witty and quoted funny movies, and you know, had a good old time. But it was a good thing, and I to this very day still keep in touch with several of those guys. There's even one of them here in Iowa City that lived in that dorm about the same time I did, and every once in a while I'll see him downtown or something and kind of wink and a nod, you know, a knowing glance. But we both have salt and peppered hair, and it's been a lot of years and everything. But so I had always known that I kind of wanted to go into medicine. It was sort of the dream, I guess, of mine from a pretty early age. I went to the hospital with my dad and watched him do procedures and spent a lot of time with him. And it was sort of all I knew. I mean, my mom was a nurse and my dad was a physician, and every night around the dinner table it was talk about medicine, and it was car rides. We were talking about medicine, and so I really kind of got indoctrinated into that early on and made that a pursuit of mine. And so I majored in human biology and took pre-med classes when I went to the University of Kansas with the intention of applying to medical school. And ultimately got in and went over to the University of Missouri to do my medical school training. And I think I'll pause there, and then I'm going to backtrack a little bit and just sort of mix in my experience of faith too, because that was a big part of my upbringing, and I want to kind of lay out the groundwork for what I was exposed to growing up to about this age. And we're talking about, you know, about 20 here. And so my mom and dad both were Methodists. They went to a Methodist church there in Rockport, and they started taking me probably, presumably from the moment of birth. I rarely missed a Sunday, and kind of went all through the ranks there and came up through the Sunday school classes, and all the other moms probably, you know, had to put up with me in their Sunday school class at one time or another, and you know, pasted lots of pictures of Mary and Joseph onto felt boards and whatever. But it was great exposure. I mean, I've kind of noticed that when I get around people my age who don't have a church background, I see now just how much I was taught over the years in terms of you know, having a biblical background and understanding those stories and those characters, and hearing a lot of teaching about Scripture and all of it. And so I'm really thankful looking back now. And the other thing that I love too is that I know all these hymns. I'll get in situations and stuff. I went to this church a few years ago and played in the worship band, and we'd play hymns a lot, and we'd rock them up and play them. But I always knew them, which was awesome. I loved it. It was so cool to like take some song that I thought was lame from my childhood, or maybe secretly liked but wasn't aware that I even liked it, and jazz it up and play it and kind of give, breathe new life into it. And the lyrics of some of those hymns, by the way, the poetry of those things were just really fantastic. And so it was cool to get exposed to that. Those things were written hundreds of years ago now, and those guys, they didn't have iPhones. So they all sat around reading classic literature, and it shows in their songwriting too. Like this is why it's important, partly as an artist of any kind, to expose yourself to the greats, is because it makes you better. It just does. When you take a look at what the very best people of all time have done, it just makes you a better artist with a bigger breadth of knowledge and understanding of your particular craft. I have this good buddy, Mitch, and he's a guitar player, man, and he knows every Beatles album, like front to back, and every guitar part on every album, and the stuff that was, released in the B-sides and the outtakes. And man, he's just like an encyclopedia. And he, not only the Beatles, but he listens to all these old classic bands like, Cream and I don't even know, like all the Beach Boys and Dylan and all this kind of stuff. And he's just a fabulous guitar player. And you can tell that his playing has been informed by a lot of those great artists. And it's like it never goes out of style. But I digress. So anyway, I went off to college, and a lot of that faith background, it really stuck with me. Now, I'm not going to tell you I didn't go engage in pretty traditional debauchery that many college students engage in, because I certainly did. But a lot of that stuff really stuck with me, and I never really let it go. And in fact, I found some like campus organization and a couple different ones that I participated in, and did my best to kind of retain some activity in that regard. And I don't know, it was just something that I couldn't lay it down. It had a hold of me from a very young age. It had really kind of grabbed on, and I think my relationship with God and relationship with Jesus, so to speak, is something that once he gets in there, you can bet you're going to keep hearing from him, no matter what you're doing, no matter where you are, no matter what kind of behaviors you're engaging in. And maybe that's the comparison, is that he doesn't reject. We have these experiences throughout our life where we experience this rejection of one form or another, and we reject him all over the place, but he never rejects us back. And that's something that I've noticed profoundly over the years, is that no matter how low I get, no matter how wintry it feels in my heart, he's there warming it back up again. And so I credit my parents for introducing me to that God early on, and I encourage you parents to do the same for your kids, and it's a good thing. And so I stayed with it there somewhat through college, and got married, and kept on participating in church a little bit, on and off. I mean, it's hard not to take some time and kind of ask yourself some difficult questions. And you of course go to college and you meet people that have very different ideas about faith than you, and people from different faith backgrounds, atheists, agnostics, and professors. And it's hard to sometimes hold on to what you've been taught. And I think it's a good thing to maybe hold it up to the light a little bit and let it be challenged, because guess what? The truth is the truth, and it doesn't matter where you are. When you hold the truth up to the light, it can withstand a beating. So don't be afraid. I think a lot of people are afraid that if they send their kids off to college and everything, it's going to ruin their minds and all this. And I don't know. I suppose there may be some people out there who are hell bent on brainwashing our young people, but for the most part, I think it's the parents' responsibility to give their kids a background, because we can't contain our kids forever and shelter them and keep them from. And why would we want to? I mean, don't we want our kids to have a faith that's real to them, that's been challenged, that's been held up to the light, that maybe they've fallen away from and come back to on their own accord because it meant something? Isn't that what we want? And don't we believe in a God who pursues people and doesn't let them go? A good shepherd that goes off after the one sheep, leaves the other 99 on the side of the hill and rejoices for the one that comes back. I mean, that's who we're talking about. And so there's not a lot to fear. There isn't. And it's a good thing, and we can live in a lot more freedom than we realize with respect to our faith and our kids, and letting our kids explore and have their own experience of faith. And this God thing never goes out of style. Like I said, I mean, here we are singing these hymns that are hundreds of years old in this liberal college town. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's and I know many people who are from all over the political spectrum, left, right, and otherwise apolitical, and everything else, that absolutely adore Jesus and try to follow him and do everything they can to further God's kingdom on earth. And so, all this fear about, well, the liberals are going to, ruin my kid's mind, or these conservatives are just so bigoted and small-minded. And it's like, none of that's really true all the time. Those are stereotypes that both sides of the aisle kind of bite on because it serves their political cause, but it's really not grounded in a lot of reality in my experience. So anyway, there's part one of my story. That kind of takes me up to about age 20 or so. And the next couple of days, I will elaborate further. And you know what? I really appreciate you listening. Just a country psychiatrist down here in my basement in flyover country telling my story. And I appreciate you listening. And I hope it's helpful to hear a story. And I think I'll be encouraging you this today and in the days to come. Find people who will listen to your story. We're just in the fledgling stages. Me and this friend I was talking about earlier on, we were having coffee. We're just in the very fledgling stages of trying to figure out how to provide people with some specific direction and leadership in building some small group communities based somewhat around maybe some of the material that we discussed in this podcast, but trying to put together some formal material, because one of the things that's just desperately missing from my standpoint in the world today is an authentic experience of what we in the church often call community, which is being around a group of people who are safe to you and are trusted, and that you feel you can take a risk with and let yourself be known and know them back. And that is just such a healing thing. I work in the mental health business, and I've made emotional healing my livelihood. And I can tell you right now that a group of loving people who are willing to be honest with you and know you and hear you and speak back to you is one of the most powerful healing modalities that I know of. Often far more powerful than one-on-one sessions with a therapist or medications for that matter. Not that those things are necessarily, they're not bad. They're just other tools in the arsenal. But getting around some people is huge. And so, like I say, me and this friend of mine, Janice and Shelley, we're sitting around thinking of ways we might be able to do that. So anyway, listen for more information on that as the weeks go by here. And if you would, I would very much appreciate any kind of a donation on my Patreon account. This is this podcast is something I do as a service, and it takes away from my work, and I love it, and I would do it for free, but also some support would really help make it possible to do it in, I think, some new and unique ways as time goes on. So if you go to my website, theheartacheconnoisseur.com, there is a link to my Patreon account, and I'm still kind of getting this. It'll be a tighter presentation here in the days to come, but you can see on there ways to donate, and I think it's pretty self-explanatory. So feel free to do that, and if you don't, that's fine too. Please keep listening, free of charge. I'm happy to offer this to whoever would like to listen, and feel free to share it too, and comment and do all that business. So anyway, hey, that's the Heartache Connoisseur for the first episode of the year 2018. Thank you for joining me. I hope you had a great holiday season. You're probably listening to this from your treadmill, and you probably need to kick up the elevation and the speed a little, because you're probably loafing, and we don't want any of that. So anyway, have a good Tuesday, and we'll see you tomorrow.